Her granddaughter called her a spare tire, just loud enough for the hallway to hear. Grace Milburn, retired teacher and widow, didn't speak. She simply highlighted a line in her trust. Contingent beneficiaries may be revoked at will. By Friday, Kylie's tuition vanished. So did the keys. She'd raised her once. Now she was raising boundaries. And when the will was read, Kylie learned what it meant to be truly replaced. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The tea kettle let out a low, rising whistle just as Grace reached for the honey jar. She turned the flame off and poured the water into a chipped white mug, the one with faint cursive letters that read, "World's Best Teacher." Her hands moved with practiced ease, slow and deliberate, even as her stomach twisted. From the living room, Kylie's voice echoed through the phone speaker, shrill with laughter. "She's just my backup parent, like a spare tire," Kylie joked. "Only comes out when you're stranded or something." A pause. Then more laughter, hers and whoever was on the other end. Careless, light, unbothered. Grace didn't flinch. She stirred the tea, squeezing a lemon wedge over the rim, her hand steady. She'd brought Kylie home from the hospital, rocked her through colic, sat through middle school talent shows with forced enthusiasm, bought every overpriced college textbook without hesitation. She'd answered every call, every late-night emergency, every flat tire, and now she was the spare. The mug trembled slightly when she set it down on the granite counter, not because her hand slipped, but because the words hadn't. She didn't say a thing. Just walked past Kylie and her phone call, gently closing the door behind her as she stepped into the night air. By 9:42 p.m., Kylie was texting. "OMG Grandma, I forgot my charger at your place. Can you please drop it off? I'm dying over here." Grace read the message while standing by her entry table, the charger already in hand. She hadn't even unplugged it from the wall yet. Kylie's carelessness was a routine, one Grace had adapted to like muscle memory. No thanks, no planning, just an expectation she'd always be on call. She put on her coat and drove the 5 minutes to Kylie's student housing complex, a row of cheaply built townhomes with half-lit porch lights and overgrown lawns. She didn't knock or call, just parked at the curb, charger coiled on the passenger seat like a forgotten lifeline. Inside, lights flickered from the upstairs window. Grace could see silhouettes, Kylie pacing, phone in hand, animated and unaware. She didn't get out, just waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Grace finally leaned over, rolled down the window an inch, and tossed the charger onto the sidewalk. It landed beside a pair of abandoned sneakers. No one noticed. The next morning, Clara let herself in through the back screen door, holding 2 cups of coffee and her usual bag of unsolicited opinions. "I brought the good stuff," she announced, eyeing Grace's quiet posture at the kitchen table. "You look like you've been marinating in your own thoughts again." Grace offered a soft smile. "Just doing inventory." Clara sat down, steam rising between them. "I ran into Janine Carpenter at the grocery store, said you helped her son get through AP English when nobody else believed he could pass. He's a paramedic now." Grace looked out the window. "I remember, he wrote a final essay about CPR that made me cry." Clara leaned in. "You taught half this town's kids, Grace. Not one of them ever treated you like a spare." Silence stretched between them, warm but dense. Grace finally spoke. "Well, she won't be inheriting the vehicle." Clara blinked. "Come again?" But Grace had already stood up, her tea untouched. She crossed to the hallway closet and pulled out a dusty file box marked Estate. She placed it on the table with a quiet thud. "I think it's time to rotate the tires." Grace hated the smell of modern office buildings, the way recycled air mixed with lemon-scented furniture polish and overwatered lobby plants. It always reminded her of school board meetings, polite, sterile, and quietly brutal. The receptionist barely looked up as she entered the office of Jordan Ellis, attorney at law. But the moment Grace stepped through the frosted glass door to the inner office, Jordan stood. "You look serious," he said, straightening his tie. "Which means I'm about to do real work today." Grace managed a soft smile. "Something like that." Jordan had been her attorney for 12 years, handled the refinancing of her house, her pension rollover, the original will that had been typed on his laptop while they both ate lukewarm soup in the break room one rainy February. Back then, naming Kylie the primary heir had felt right, simple, expected. Now, Grace placed a fresh manila envelope on the table between them like a chess player setting down her opening move. "I want to revisit the will." Jordan raised a brow but didn't touch the envelope. "All right. What's changed?" She exhaled slowly. "Let's talk about alternate beneficiaries." He blinked, paused. "Is this temporary? A symbolic protest?" Grace met his eyes. "It's overdue." Jordan nodded once, then opened the envelope and began scanning the documents. "You'll want a formal amendment, possibly a full restatement depending on how far you want to go." "All the way." He looked up. "Okay then, we'll pull the full asset profile, pension, Roth IRA, house equity, even the bonds your husband left. You want a clean audit?" "Yes. And I want it itemized. I want to see everything I've built." The word built landed heavier than intended. Jordan didn't question it. She sat back, her hands folded in her lap, watching as he opened up her file on his computer and started typing notes. Outside, the wind nudged the tops of the Chico orchard trees that framed his third-story window. It was a town built on routine, annual peach harvests, seasonal school board squabbles, the 4th of July parade, and yet something inside her felt like it was bending away from the rhythm, peeling off from the path she'd quietly walked for decades. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She didn't reach for it. Jordan was still talking, something about revocable versus irrevocable clauses, but the second buzz was followed immediately by a third. She finally pulled it out. "Rachel," one new text. "Kylie says you've been cold lately. Everything okay?" Grace stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen. There was something almost performative about it, as though concern had become a reflex, not a feeling. Like Rachel had built a library of stock phrases to use whenever parenting from a distance required a check-in. She didn't reply. She placed the phone screen down on Jordan's desk. "Also," she said, interrupting his flow, "I want to prepare a transfer structure. Not for the family, for the community, for kids who never had backup anything." Jordan sat back in his chair and gave her a long, measured look. "You're serious?" She nodded once. "I want to turn the will into a trust. Something living, something with boundaries." He gave a low whistle. "Grace Milburn, stirring the town. Number just rearranging the passengers." He chuckled, then sobered. "You understand that once we enact this and file the restatement, Kylie and Rachel won't be able to challenge it easily, especially not if we document intent clearly. That's the point." There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just clarity. The kind that comes after months, maybe years, of being quietly undervalued. She stood, smoothed her coat, and reached for the folder Jordan had just finished printing. "I'll review the draft changes, but I want the audit fast-tracked. Give me 5 days." She nodded, paused at the door. "Jordan? Yeah? If anyone asks, don't say I'm angry. Say I'm awake." She left before he could answer. That evening, she returned home to find her porch light already flicked on. The jasmine had overgrown near the steps, curling into itself like a secret. She picked up the mail, just bills, flyers, and a glossy alumni newsletter addressed to Miss Grace Milburn. No Ms., no Mrs., just Miss. She opened the front door and dropped her keys into the ceramic dish shaped like a bird bath. Her phone buzzed again. "Rachel," one new text. "Just checking in. We good?" Grace didn't answer. She walked straight to her study and opened the file box again. Inside, an old picture of Kylie at age 10 had fallen loose from a folder. She turned it over. In her granddaughter's handwriting, faded in purple marker. "For Grandma, my forever person." She placed the photo face down and reached for her pen. The attic dust clung to Grace's forearms like pollen as she pulled the crate down from the top shelf. The tape was brittle, yellowed at the corners, and curled like dried leaves. She placed the box gently on the floor, knelt beside it, and lifted the lid. Inside, kindergarten drawings folded into construction paper cards, old report cards with stickers still affixed, scribbled notes with hearts around the word Grandma. Beneath them, a worn folder labeled Kylie, medforms/field trips/emergencies. Grace opened it slowly. The dates spanned nearly 2 decades. Pediatrician visits, dental cleanings, ballet class registrations, asthma prescriptions, the second-grade lice scare, all filled out in her handwriting. Rachel's signature appeared maybe twice. Grace pulled out a post-it note near the bottom. It was scrawled in Kylie's childlike handwriting. "I love you because you always come." She pressed her thumb to the words, then closed the box. At dinner that evening, Grace made Kylie's favorite, rigatoni with vodka sauce, minus the vodka. Rachel had texted hours earlier, saying they'd swing by. "Feels like we haven't done this in ages." The three of them sat around the table under the warm glow of the antique glass pendant light that Grace had once rewired herself. The room still smelled of fresh basil and garlic. Kylie was halfway through her second helping when she said it. "Grandma just absorbs stress for the family," she said, laughing, "like emotional Febreze." Rachel chuckled, didn't even blink. Grace slowly put down her fork. "You're welcome." Rachel looked up, confused. For what? The pause that followed was long enough to hear the low whir of the dishwasher in the background. Grace stood, collected her plate, and walked it to the sink. Behind her, Kylie launched into a story about finals week and her friend Morgan's mental breakdown. Grace didn't turn around, just ran warm water over the ceramic, watching sauce swirl and fade. Later, after they'd gone, Grace sat back down at the table and stared at the empty placemats. One had a faint lipstick stain. Another still had a dried basil leaf tucked into its stitching. She didn't clear them. The next morning, Clara showed up with a plastic storage bin and her signature entrance. A knock, then immediate walking in. "Look what I rescued from the school clean-out," she announced, plunking the container on Grace's coffee table. "Figured it belonged with you more than the dumpster." Grace opened the lid. Stacks of letters. Dozens. Handwritten, colorful, misspelled, tear-stained, joyful. Each one addressed to Ms. Milburn or Mrs. M, thanking her for everything from making Shakespeare not suck to believing I wasn't dumb. She ran her fingers over a crayon drawing of her standing next to a chalkboard that read, "You matter." Clara settled into the recliner across from her, removing her coat. "I swear you raised half this town, and the other half still writes you every December." Grace didn't respond immediately. She was holding a letter from a former student named Ellie. It read, "You saved my life. You never even knew you did, but you did." She rose quietly and crossed to her roll-top desk, pulled out a stack of cream-colored envelopes. On each one, she began writing names in precise, looping cursive: Destiny Alvarez, Lamar T. Douglas, Ellie Monroe, Jillian Sykes. Clara peered over. "What's all that?" "Legacy recipients," Grace said. "For what?" Grace didn't look up. "What I should have left to the people who saw me, not the ones who used me." Clara nodded slowly, not pushing. Grace kept writing. As twilight crept in through the bay window, Grace added another name to an envelope, a former student who had sent her a bookmark every year since college. She placed the envelope in a small wooden box she'd emptied earlier that morning. It used to hold old family photos. She didn't feel sad, not exactly, just reordered. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Rachel, one new text. "Hey, can you proof Kylie's internship essay? She said you're the grammar queen." Grace turned off the light and left the message unread. Instead, she opened another envelope and began her next letter, the first official thank you from the future Grace Milburn Trust. It started with a silence. Not an argument, not a slammed door, just a vanishing. Grace had commented on Kylie's post, a filtered photo of her lounging at a rooftop cafe, a latte art heart perfectly framed against an untouched MacBook. The caption read, "Hard work looks good on me. Trosker Seniors and..." Grace had typed it slowly, carefully. "I hope the barista accepts student debt as a tip." No emoji, no harshness, just truth, neatly packaged. By morning the post was still there. But Grace wasn't. Blocked. She double-checked, clicked Kylie's name. User not found. A strange quiet pressed in behind her ribs. Not hurt, not even surprised, just noted. "Let me see your page," Grace said the next day, holding her coffee mug in Clara's kitchen. Clara raised an eyebrow. "I don't stalk family, I stalk exes." Grace smirked. "Just pull it up." With a theatrical sigh, Clara handed over her phone and scrolled until the grid of Kylie's curated life came into view. Grace tilted the screen. Photo after photo. Kylie in a silk dress holding a champagne flute, Kylie pouting next to a new Louis Vuitton tote, Kylie with her friend group captioned, "Family is who shows up." Then one that made Grace pause. Rachel, posed beneath a Mom Squad balloon arch at some fundraiser, beaming, arm around Kylie. The caption read, "Proud single mom. We raised her alone." Grace's hand stiffened slightly around the phone. She handed it back. Clara tilted her head. "You all right?" "I think I'm ready to redecorate." By the afternoon, Grace was standing on a step stool in her hallway, tugging down the last of the framed family photos. They'd been there for years. Rachel's second-grade portrait with her uneven bangs, Kylie in her Halloween fairy costume, the forced smile vacation shots from Lake Tahoe. She wrapped each one in newspaper, methodical and emotionless. By sundown, the wall was blank. She stood back, hands on her hips. The void looked honest. Later that evening, she returned with a stack of rolled prints and soft cloth gloves. Each piece had been stored in her desk drawer for decades. Student art projects from her favorite years teaching, gifts from seniors who said she changed their lives. She unrolled a charcoal drawing of a hand reaching toward sunlight, then pinned up a watercolor of a girl standing alone on a hill. Abstract, raw, imperfect, but alive. Clara dropped by just as she was hanging the final piece, a vibrant collage of torn magazine pages that spelled out, "Words can build worlds." She whistled. "That wall looks lighter." Grace didn't hesitate. "So do I." They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, staring at the new gallery of stories that weren't blood, but were hers all the same. That night, Grace pulled out a leather-bound journal and started a fresh page. At the top, she wrote in bold letters, "Erased not equal to forgotten." She began listing moments. September 2007, stayed overnight with Kylie during Rachel's hospital shift, missed school for it. March 2012, bought Kylie's prom dress when the budget mysteriously fell through. June 2016, co-signed a car loan, never saw the paperwork again. She closed the book and exhaled. Her phone lit up with a notification, not from Kylie or Rachel, but from an old student named Jillian. Jillian Sykes tagged you in a post. "Everything I am started in her classroom. Thank you, Ms. Milburn." Grace read it 3 times before allowing herself a smile. The doorbell rang. She opened it to find an envelope on the mat. No return address. Inside was a glossy invitation. Legacy dinner, honoring Grace Milburn, hosted by Rachel Evans. Grace held the card like it might burn. The invitation stayed on Grace's entry table for 3 days. She never opened it again after that first glance, but she didn't throw it away either. Just let it sit there, glossy, over-designed, dishonest, like a sugar-coated obituary for a woman who hadn't died. On the 4th morning, she picked it up and slid it into her shredder. It jammed halfway through. Typical, she thought. Even erasure didn't come easy in this family. "Remove them," she said flatly, sitting across from Jordan in his office again. Jordan blinked. "You mean from the will?" "From everything. I want their names out of every line." He didn't argue, just clicked open the draft and began typing. "And the new primary beneficiary?" Grace passed him a typed page. The top read, "The Robert Milburn Memorial Scholarship Fund for Students of Merit, Grit, and Invisible Burdens." Jordan read the header twice, then looked up. "Your husband would have loved this." "He never forgot what it cost him to get out of the orchard fields," she said, "and he wouldn't have let our name rot in an Instagram caption." Jordan gave a low, admiring whistle as he scrolled. "And this clause here? Co-approval required for any future amendments? Joint authorization only. You and Mrs. Mendoza at the education office." He raised a brow. "You're locking it down." No audit trail back to my bloodline. She said it without venom, just the quiet firmness of someone done justifying her dignity. The next afternoon, the phone rang while she was sorting mail. Rachel. Grace stared at the screen before picking up. She didn't say hello. Rachel launched in, tone already halfway toward irritation masked as warmth. I sent you an invite for the dinner, did you see it? It's at the Ridge House. We're calling it the Legacy Dinner, honoring everything you've done. Kylie's helping plan it. Grace took a long sip of her coffee. The legacy isn't for show. A pause on the other end. Then slightly forced laughter. Okay, well, I just thought, people want to celebrate you while you're still around. No, Rachel. What you want is to be seen celebrating me. That's different. Another pause, this one sharper. Are you mad about something dumb again? Grace hung up. That evening, she lit a candle in the corner of her study, a habit she'd kept from her classroom days, and laid out 2 envelopes side by side, one for Jordan, one for Mrs. Mendoza. Inside each, the signed trust papers. Witnessed, notarized, irrevocable. Her estate, every bond, the house, her pension, now belonged to the fund. Kylie and Rachel weren't just disinherited, they were erased. Grace ran her hand over the envelope's flap like she was sealing a wound. Later that night, the text came in. Kylie, seriously? Are you mad about something dumb again? Like what now? Grace didn't reply. She scrolled instead, opened her photo roll, found a picture taken 10 years ago. Kylie, 11 years old, asleep in the back seat of Grace's car, arms wrapped around a spelling bee trophy, her face smudged with pride and exhaustion. Grace remembered pulling over just to watch her breathe. She deleted the photo. Outside, the streetlights flickered on across the neighborhood, a quiet grid of soft glows and gentle shadows. Grace stood by the window, holding a teacup in one hand, her breath fogging the glass. The scholarship website would launch tomorrow. A press release would follow. By the weekend, it would be public record. The names Milburn and Mendoza would be tied together forever. She stared out into the dark until her reflection stared back. On her doorstep the next morning sat a gift bag, pink, metallic, and obviously last minute. No note. Inside, a half-used scented candle, a keychain that said, "World's Best Grandma," and a crumpled $25 Starbucks card. Grace set it gently in the trash. Then she locked the door from the inside. The morning sun hit Grace's kitchen window at a sharp angle, catching the edges of a stack of envelopes on her table like a spotlight trained on a performer. Except Grace didn't flinch. She just turned the page of the donation ledger and kept writing. Clara entered mid-sentence, balancing 2 coffees and a manila folder under one arm. You've already beat me to it. You're halfway through the stack. Only because I know who I'm writing to, Grace said. People who never made me beg to matter. Clara dropped the folder onto the table. That's the student bios. Mrs. Mendoza sent over the first round. You'll want to read Carson Romero's. Kid's mother worked 3 jobs to keep him in school. He tutors calculus on weekends and still calls his 9th grade art teacher, ma'am. Grace smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She took the folder and ran her hand over its corner before opening it. On the same morning, 3 states away, the Chico State University student newspaper hit campus mailboxes. Page A3, dead center, a full-color spread of a young woman named Amaya Chen standing in front of a mural she painted at her community center. Underneath, bold serif text, meet the first recipient of the Robert Milburn Memorial Scholarship. Education should belong to those who've been told it never will. Grace Milburn. The quote alone would have been enough, but Clara had insisted they include a QR code linking to the new foundation website. Grace had agreed, quietly, reluctantly, knowing that the light she'd been denied by her family would now shine elsewhere. That afternoon, Grace was organizing the receipts by category. Online donations, check gifts, a surprise $1,000 wire transfer from a former student she hadn't spoken to in 15 years, when her phone buzzed. Group text, the family thread, Kylie. Some people don't know when to retire. A screenshot followed, the scholarship ad. Clearly cropped, clearly snatched from the online version of the paper. No one else replied in the thread, not even Rachel. Grace looked at it for a moment, then calmly exited the app. She didn't delete the message. She wanted it there, preserved, cataloged, like a fossil from a species that had lost its chance to evolve. That same evening, Rachel posted a filtered photo of Kylie in a satin blazer holding a certificate, proud to announce Kylie's nomination for the Regional Civic Innovation Award. This girl never stops. Raised her right, jock proud mom, legacy in progress. Grace saw it through Clara's account again. She didn't laugh, didn't fume. She simply looked down at the spreadsheet she'd been working on. In the margin beside Amaya's name, she typed, Public Art for Underfunded Communities. First mural complete, second project pending. Then she sent a text. To Mrs. Mendoza lunch next week? I want to finalize Carson and Amaya before we open second-round applications. The reply came less than a minute later. Of course, I'll reserve a table at Luna's, our treat. P.S. Carson cried when he got the call, thought it was a prank. Grace blinked once, then twice. She pushed back from her desk and went to the kitchen to make tea. The good kind, the loose-leaf tin her husband used to love. The landline rang just as she was pouring. Rachel. She let it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. Grace stared at it, unmoved, her cup hovering mid-air. She sat down at the table, phone still vibrating in the next room, and opened a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, in her signature cursive, Next round, students I won't let be ignored. Outside, the mail truck pulled up. The driver dropped a single oversized envelope through the slot. Grace went to retrieve it. It was from a design firm. Sample proofs for the scholarship's first billboard. The tagline, splashed across the bottom in bold white, Some legacies speak louder than blood. Grace smiled, and for the first time in weeks, she laughed. Kylie hit submit payment twice before realizing something was wrong. The loading wheel spun like it had stage fright, and then a red error message blinked on her laptop screen. Transaction declined. Please verify cardholder or account status. She refreshed. Tried again. Declined. She opened her banking app. The screen flickered for a moment before flashing a second error. Insufficient authorization. Contact cosigner. Her throat tightened. Not with fear. Not yet. With disbelief. By the third refresh, it tipped into rage. Rachel called Grace on speakerphone 5 minutes later, the panic already bubbling under her tone. Mom, it's Rachel. Listen, Kylie just tried to process her final tuition deposit and the card didn't go through. The account's frozen. Is something going on with the bank? You didn't get hacked, right? Grace was in the backyard, trimming lavender from the edge of the fence. She wore gardening gloves and a denim apron with faded sunflowers on the pocket. The phone sat on the patio table beside a glass of iced tea, untouched. She didn't pick it up until the voicemail began recording. Then she answered, voice quiet but firm. Number I wasn't hacked. Rachel sighed, trying to stay calm. So then what happened? The tuition card's under your name. Kylie said you were still the cosigner. I'm not, Grace said simply. Not anymore. A stunned pause. Then a rising edge. Excuse me? I removed myself from the account 2 weeks ago. You didn't warn us. You didn't ask. Rachel's voice cracked into a disbelieving scoff. Are you seriously going to jeopardize her graduation over some passive-aggressive revenge plot? This isn't about her graduation, Grace replied. It's about her assumption that I would keep funding disrespect. She's 22. She doesn't know any better. She's had 22 years to learn. Grace ended the call. She plucked one last lavender stalk, set it gently in the basket, and turned back toward the house. By evening, Jordan had filed the freeze order with the private lender Grace had once co-signed through. A single call and a notarized form had been enough to close out her responsibility and redirect the final balance payment to the foundation's secured disbursement account. As promised, the trust covered all remaining balances tied to the new scholarship recipients, including a student named Marcus, whose mom had sent a teary voicemail Grace hadn't had the heart to delete. Jordan's text came through just as she finished dinner, funds transferred and audit complete. You're clear. P.S. The essay from Marcus? Gutted me. You made the right call. Grace sat back in her chair, fork resting across her plate, and stared at the ceiling for a long, long moment. At 11:12 p.m., her phone buzzed. "Kylie, you ruined my future." The words blinked across her lock screen like an accusation carved in ice. Grace didn't reply right away. She read it again, then opened her notes app. She copied the text in. Underneath she typed, "You mistook inheritance for insurance. I didn't ruin your future. I rescued my past." Then she deleted the original message. Outside, thunder rolled low across the foothills, rare for summer in Chico. The jasmine shook against the windows like it knew something was coming. Grace walked to her desk and pulled out the file labeled Final Disclosures. It contained copies of every financial document Jordan had sent, each page marked with a date and a clause. At the back, she slipped in Kylie's text. Printed, archived. She opened her ledger and crossed off one final task. Revoke cosign privileges, done. Then she pulled out the envelope with the final draft of the foundation charter and underlined one line in red. Applicants must demonstrate character, not claim. The lights flickered as the thunder cracked again. Grace didn't flinch. Grace opened a new spreadsheet and typed the title across cell A1 in bold, "Former students whose lives I want to change." She stared at the blinking cursor for a long time before typing the first name. Ellie Monroe, a girl who used to stay after class just to be somewhere quiet, who once left a crumpled note in Grace's desk drawer that read, "You made me feel like someone could still choose me." Row by row, the names started returning. Lamar T. Douglas, Jillian Sykes, Amaya Chen, Marcus H. Benton. She opened a second tab. Current status. Another. Grant eligibility. It felt more alive than any family tree she'd ever been asked to build. By early afternoon, Grace was dialing numbers she hadn't used in years. Some went to voicemail, others didn't connect, but a few surprised her. "Ms. Milburn?" said a woman's voice on the second ring. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Grace smiled. "I'm better than okay, Destiny." The woman on the other end choked up. "I thought something happened. You're calling after all these years. Sorry, You were the reason I survived 10th grade." Grace didn't speak right away. She let the silence hold them both. Then quietly, "I'm building something, and I want you to be part of it." By sunset, the list had grown to 17 names. Grace had handwritten everyone in a notebook beside the laptop, pen gliding smoothly, as if the names were returning home. She grouped them by need: tuition relief, relocation grants, mentorship tracks. Then she added a new column: impact potential. That phrase, Jordan had said, was how foundations measured value. But Grace wasn't measuring value. She was measuring memory. Meanwhile, across town, Jordan Ellis sat in his office, reading an email from Rachel Evans with the subject line, "Inheritance clarification?" Her tone, while formally composed, was clearly sharpening at the edges. "Hi, Jordan. I've heard from multiple people now that my mother is shifting her estate in ways I wasn't informed of. This seems unlikely, but I would appreciate a direct clarification as I'm still listed on her will as far as I'm aware. Kylie and I just want to make sure there's no confusion. Please advise." Jordan read it twice before typing his reply. No greeting, no preamble. Just one line. "You are not listed anywhere." He hit send. Then he leaned back in his chair, cracked his knuckles, and smiled grimly. That evening, Grace lit a single candle in her study and pulled out the first application draft for the mentorship track. She had 3 names flagged to pilot it, all students who'd gone into education. One now ran an after-school arts program in Sacramento. Another worked at a community college in Reno. She highlighted their rows in yellow. These weren't heirs, they were echoes. The wind picked up around 9 p.m., stirring the blinds just enough to make the room feel momentarily haunted. Grace stood, stretched, and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Her phone buzzed from the table. From Jordan Ellis. Subject: confirmation. All official notifications have gone out. Rachel is aware. Kylie will know soon enough. You're fully protected. J. She closed the email without replying. Instead, she walked to the living room and took down the last remaining family photo still hanging near the hall, the one of Kylie in her graduation cap, grinning with eyes too busy posing to see who was holding the camera. She placed it in a drawer and slid it shut, then returned to her list. At the very bottom of the spreadsheet, in the notes column, she typed a line. "I thought legacy meant inheritance. I was wrong. It means choosing who remembers you, and why." Outside, a porch light flicked off in the neighbor's yard. Clara's silhouette crossed the street carrying 2 mugs. She knocked once. Grace answered with a pen still in her hand. Clara held out the coffee. "You look like you're about to sign the Declaration of Independence." Grace grinned. "Just writing history." The knock came at 8:46 p.m. Not the hesitant tap Grace had expected, but a sharp, urgent rhythm. She paused the kettle on the stove, her hand tightening slightly around the handle. Through the peephole, Kylie, arms crossed, jaw set, no umbrella, no warmth, just entitlement wrapped in drizzle. Grace opened the door halfway. Kylie pushed forward instinctively, not entering but close. "Why did Jordan email Mom like that? What the hell is going on?" "This isn't a transaction," Grace said quietly. "It's a goodbye." Kylie blinked, startled. The porch light caught the smudged mascara under her eyes. "What does that mean?" Grace stepped back just enough for air to stretch between them. "It means," she said, "that you no longer owe me fake affection, and I no longer owe you unconditional rescue." Kylie's voice rose. "You're cutting me off because I blocked you on Instagram? Because I made a joke? This is insane." Grace held up a single sheet of paper. Clean, double-sided, stapled. Kylie squinted. "What is that?" "Every financial contribution I've made on your behalf," Grace said. "Since the day you were born." Kylie laughed. A short, bitter burst. "What, you're keeping receipts now?" "No," Grace said. "I'm giving them to you." She extended the paper through the cracked door. Kylie didn't take it. Grace set it gently on the threshold where the drizzle had started to soak the edge. "I gave you a foundation," Grace said, her voice low and clear. "You built a platform to mock me from." Kylie's throat bobbed. "I didn't. You called me a spare tire. Twice. That wasn't a joke. That was who I became to you." A pause. Just wind. Kylie's eyes flicked downward toward the paper, then back up. Her voice dropped to a tighter pitch. "So you're giving everything to strangers now? That's what this is?" "No," Grace said. "I'm giving everything to survivors." The front light buzzed above them, its flickering making the shadows pulse behind Kylie's frame like a spotlight threatening to burn out. "I thought you loved me," Kylie whispered. "I do," Grace said. "That's why I'm ending this now, before you break something that can't be fixed." Kylie stared at her grandmother for a long moment, then her gaze shifted. Cold. Familiar. "You know Mom says this is just you being dramatic, that you'll come around." Grace didn't answer. Instead, she reached behind the door and pulled out a second envelope. "This one's for her," she said, placing it directly atop the damp receipt on the doorstep. Kylie didn't bend down to take either. She just turned. No apology, no backward glance, just stormed down the steps, heels clacking across the wet concrete like the retreat of someone who'd already made peace with rewriting the story in her own favor. Grace watched until Kylie reached her car. The headlights didn't come on for almost a full minute. Then, tires peeled into the night. Inside, Grace shut the door gently. She didn't deadbolt it. She didn't need to. She walked back to the kettle and turned the flame back on. The click-click-click of the ignition was almost soothing. Outside, rain began in earnest, soft at first, then steady. She poured the tea, carried it to the living room, and sat in the chair she used to rock Kylie in when she was teething. Now it just rocked with memory. From her side table, she pulled a sealed folder labeled Phase 2, Expansion Cities Sacramento, Fresno, Reno, Boise. She opened to the first page. A sharp ping echoed from her phone on the entry table. New message. "Rachel, you had no right." Grace didn't open it. She reached for her pen instead and underlined a line in the Foundation's new mission draft. "No one is entitled to what they mock. She clicked off the hallway light and left the receipts in the rain. The article dropped on a Thursday morning, buried on page 6 of the Chico Valley Herald, between a city council recap and a local bake sale notice. Just a modest headline, 1 column wide. Retired teacher launches education trust, honoring late husband. No splashy graphics, no pull quotes, just a quiet announcement like Grace wanted. But by noon, the comments section was already filling up online. She taught me how to diagram sentences like a boss. Forever grateful, Ms. Milburn. If anyone deserves to have her name on a building, it's her. She stayed late with me after my brother died, never asked for credit. Grace didn't post the article, she didn't need to. Her former students did. By the end of the day, the foundation's donation page had crashed twice from traffic. Clara's niece, a tech consultant in Santa Cruz, fixed the back end and added a live counter to the top corner. Donors: 436 raised, 78,091 messages. Left: 117. Clara called it a movement. Grace just called it forward. Rachel saw it through a shared Facebook post from someone at her office. She stared at the headline, then clicked. Her name wasn't mentioned. Kylie's either. She scrolled twice. Her heart started to pound somewhere behind her ribs, not from pain, but from exclusion. By 3:12 p.m., she was on the phone with the Herald's managing editor, trying to get a clarification issued. "I just think it's irresponsible to portray this as a solo effort," Rachel argued, her voice syrupy and controlled. There were family members involved in Grace's journey. This kind of coverage can mislead donors. The editor was polite and firm. "We fact-checked the filing documents. The trust is legally separate and entirely her own." Rachel hung up without saying goodbye. By 5:30, Kylie's group chat was buzzing. "Morgan, is that article about your grandma for real?" Shay: "Wait, why didn't you post anything about this? Kinda a big deal." Luca: "Is this the same trust that's been blowing up my feed?" Kylie didn't answer. Instead, she closed the app and scrolled Instagram, landing on her own profile. A grid full of latte art, weekend trips, faux deep captions. For the first time, it looked small. On Saturday afternoon, Clara threw a tea party in Grace's backyard, her idea, her guest list, and her vintage porcelain set. Fold-out tables lined the garden. Mason jars held tulips. Everyone brought something: lemon bars, cucumber sandwiches, tiny scones that vanished in 3 bites. It wasn't fancy, but it was full. 2 city council members showed up unannounced. A state education board rep gave a quiet speech near the trellis. Clara beamed the entire time. "Half these people used to ignore us in the grocery store," she whispered, passing Grace a napkin. "Now they're asking you for meeting invites." Grace sipped her Earl Grey. "Let them come late to the story. It's still mine." Just before the crowd began to thin, a delivery van pulled up. The driver carried a bouquet wrapped in navy blue paper, tied with a satin ribbon. "Grace Milburn?" he asked. She nodded. He handed her the card. "From Chico High, class of 1982 Alumni Fund." They said, "To tell you, the principal signed it himself." Grace unfolded the card slowly. "For the teacher who taught us that words are the sharpest legacy. We see you now." She didn't cry, but she held the card for a very long time. That evening, the house was quiet again. Grace moved through it slowly, refilling the sugar bowl, folding stray napkins, pausing at the window where the porch light glowed soft against the night. She checked the foundation page once more. Donors: 578 raised, 104,225 messages left, 191. She clicked open the most recent message. "You were the reason I didn't drop out, and now I teach English too. Thank you." She sat back, heart still, unshaken. Then her email pinged. From legalservices@evansfamilytrust.com, subject: request for documentation. Grace didn't open it. She marked it as read, then emptied her trash folder. The invitation came by courier, not email, not phone, but hand-delivered in a matte black envelope with gold lettering. Chico Unified Educators Panel, celebrating legacies in learning, honored guest, Grace Milburn. Grace turned it over twice in her hands, then opened it like it might bite. Inside was a single line, scrawled in ink just below the formal copy. "We don't usually do this, but this time it felt wrong not to. L.D." She smiled. "Luisa Delgado, former student, now deputy superintendent." The panel was in 3 days. Grace said yes without hesitation. Clara fussed for a full afternoon. Steam-pressed slacks, lipstick, a scarf Grace hadn't worn since her retirement luncheon. "You're not showing off," Clara insisted. "You're showing up. Let them know what a legacy really looks like." Grace allowed the fussing, mostly, but she insisted on driving herself. The district auditorium was packed, rows of folding chairs, bad overhead lighting, and a podium that looked like it had seen 3 decades of underfunded committees. Grace sat beside 2 other panelists, a STEM coordinator from Sacramento and a bilingual education reformer from Oakland. When it was her turn, the room fell into a hush not of awe, but of memory. Grace didn't read from a script. She spoke in a low, steady cadence, about overlooked students, about giving the invisible a place at the table, about how legacies don't start with inheritance, they start with presence. She never once said Kylie's name. She never had to. That evening, the district's official social media account posted a recap photo. Grace standing beside 2 scholarship recipients, the new banner for the Robert Milburn Trust glowing faintly in the background. The caption read, "Today we honored a teacher who didn't just grade papers, she rewrote futures." Grace's phone buzzed later that night while she was making tea. "Kylie, I guess this is who you are now." No punctuation, no emoji, just raw resentment in a single sentence. Grace stared at it, then typed back one word, "Correct?" Then she muted the thread. By morning, the article had made the local news aggregator's front page. From retired teacher to regional force, Grace Milburn's legacy isn't done yet. They included a pull quote from her panel speech. "Don't ask students to rise unless you're willing to bend down and lift." The comment section was flooded with stories. "She bought me my first notebook in 8th grade. I still write in it. When my brother died, she let me come sit in her classroom every day for a month. She made me feel seen." The article was forwarded around town, and eventually it landed in Rachel's inbox. By noon, 2 of Rachel's co-workers had casually knocked on her office door. "Didn't know your mom had her own trust," one of them said. "She's kind of trending," the other added, smiling too widely. Rachel gave a practiced smile. "She's always been passionate." Later that day, someone forwarded the district live stream of the panel. Rachel didn't open it, but she saved the link, then stared at it for a very long time. Meanwhile, Grace stood at her kitchen counter, organizing a stack of handwritten thank you letters from new applicants. She read each one twice before placing them into a binder Clara had labeled Living Legacy. She paused at one from a student named Caleb. "I don't have grandparents, but if I did, I'd want them to fight for people like you do." She slipped the letter into a clear sleeve, hands steady, then her phone lit up with a new email. Subject, National Educator Symposium, Panel Invitation. Grace didn't open it right away. She walked to her bookshelf, ran her fingers across the spines, and pulled out a slim volume, Collected Essays from First-Year English Students, 2003. She had saved it for no particular reason. Now it felt like the beginning of something new. The pen glided across the signature line with no hesitation. Grace sat across from Jordan in his downtown office, the final estate documents spread neatly in front of her, each page tagged with color-coded tabs. Outside, Chico's sycamores rustled against the windows. Inside, the silence was decisive. "That's the last one," Jordan said, capping his pen. "Every clause is in place, every protection locked." "Even the contest clause?" Grace asked, sipping the lukewarm tea Clara had insisted she bring in a thermos. "Especially the contest clause." Jordan gave her a dry smile. "Rachel and Kylie are legally barred from challenging anything. They'd need an act of God or a forged document to even try. Neither of which they believe in," Grace said quietly. Jordan chuckled, then softened. You good? Grace didn't answer right away. Instead, she slid a separate folder across the desk, labeled in her crisp handwriting for public release. What's this? My letter. It goes on the Foundation site. Right below the About Us tab, Jordan opened it. Legacy is earned, not assigned. It cannot be inherited like furniture or expected like routine. It belongs to the people who carry it forward, not the ones who simply share your name. Grace Milburn Jordan looked up. You sure you want it this plain? I'm done with metaphors, she said. Let them read what I mean. Clara made the reservation at Colfax Bistro, a local spot with linen napkins and soft jazz no one really listened to. Grace didn't protest. After all, Clara had insisted on calling it a quiet celebration, and Grace trusted Clara to keep quiet from turning into a headline. Only 4 people, Clara said, driving them in her old Camry. And I swear, no speeches, just bites and bubbles. Grace raised an eyebrow. You invited Bubbles? Sparkling cider, Clara muttered. Don't ruin it. They arrived just before sunset. The restaurant was calm, a murmur of forks on ceramic, soft laughter in the corners. But as Grace stepped through the door, 2 young people stood up from a nearby table and turned toward her. A girl in a navy blazer and thick-rimmed glasses, a boy in a pressed white button-up holding a small bouquet of daisies, neither older than 21. Ms. Milburn, the girl said, we're on the mentorship track. We heard you were coming tonight. Grace blinked. You're Amaya and Carson? They nodded in unison. May we? Carson asked, extending the flowers. Grace took them slowly, as if the weight might tip her balance. Of course. Amaya held out a folded piece of paper. It's a thank you letter, but not for the scholarship. For believing we mattered before anyone else did. Grace took it with both hands. That's the only kind of letter I've ever wanted. They left with shy smiles. Grace and Clara sat at a corner table after that, the daisies placed carefully in a chilled water glass. I didn't plan that, Clara said. I know, Grace replied. That's what made it real. After dinner, Grace walked slowly back to the car, the folded letter still in her coat pocket, warmed by her hand. She looked up at the darkening sky. A full moon hovered just behind the power lines, bright but unbothered. The kind of moon that didn't demand attention. It simply existed, constant, luminous, enough. Her phone buzzed in her purse. Notification. 1 new submission. Foundation contact form. She opened it. From anonymous subject. Regret. Some of us were raised on silence and selfishness. You broke the chain. I don't know if I'm too late, but I'm trying to be better. I'm sorry. Grace stared at it. No name. But she didn't need one. Inside the car, she unfolded the thank you letter from Amaya and Carson. Handwritten. No grammar mistakes. Just one line stood out. You weren't the bridge. You were the reason we believed there was somewhere to cross. Grace folded the letter again and smiled. Grace moved through the house with purpose, her steps soft but steady. The oak floor creaked beneath her in familiar tones, a kind of permission. The dining table was covered edge to edge in folders, photos, letters, clippings, receipts, and flash drives. In the center sat a large, leather-bound book. She had it custom-made. No title on the spine, just a gold-embossed M on the cover. She called it The Permanent Record. She began sorting in silence. Every thank you letter, every scholarship acceptance, every article clipping, every donor note. The scrapbook wasn't decorative, it was declarative. A ledger of legacy, not lineage. She slid in a folded note from a student in Montana who'd never met her in person, but had joined the mentorship track after watching her panel livestream. His handwriting was messy. His words were not, I never knew people like you existed outside novels. Across the living room, her old laptop was connected to a portable drive. Clara's nephew had helped her set up the digital archive, a password-protected vault of everything the trust had built and would need to outlive her. Board meeting minutes, speaker recordings, estate bylaws, a future-facing directory marked Transition Protocols. Grace labeled the top file, Instructions for when I'm gone, not if, when. Later that afternoon, Clara rang the doorbell with a large box wrapped in brown paper and tied with garden twine. "Don't say anything," she warned as Grace opened the door. "Just let me have this moment." Grace stepped aside. Inside the box, a quilt, hand-stitched, cream and navy, heavy as history. Each square bore the embroidered name of a student Grace had taught, 50 in total. Some full names, others initials. A few stitched so tightly it looked like they were still clinging to her classroom. Grace traced the thread in silence. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "I absolutely did," Clara replied, setting down 2 mugs of cider like it. Was any other Tuesday. At 4:13 p.m., Jordan forwarded an email chain. Subject: complaint filing, estate mismanagement allegation, filed by Rachel Evans, claim, maternal manipulation of inheritance under false mental clarity. Attached, 1 PDF, 3 pages. Desperation dressed up as concern. Jordan's reply was 2 lines. Filing dismissed. Court recognized prior documentation and intent, fully sealed. Grace didn't forward the email. She filed it under interference greater than neutralized. At 6:17 p.m., another message came through. This time, a text. "Kylie, we'll see how long you stay relevant. No punctuation, no grace." Grace read it once, then deleted it, not just from the thread, but from memory. No printout this time, no note in the ledger, no reaction. It was dust before it settled. That evening, Grace laid the quilt across the foot of her bed and returned to the journal. She slid in the final page from the Foundation website, the announcement of the expansion, a new partner program in Seattle, a pending grant in Denver, 2 remote fellows in North Carolina. The final line of the press release made her stop, founded in Chico, but rooted wherever resilience grows. She leaned back, pen hovering. Then, carefully, she wrote in the margins, "Let the name Milburn belong to the ones who carried it forward, not the ones who tried to carry it away." She closed the journal. Not finished, just complete enough. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet she used to dread. But not tonight. She walked to the entry table and straightened the mail. On top sat a postcard from a former student. In Atlanta, a photo of her standing beside a library plaque that read, "Donated in honor of Ms. Grace Milburn, for teaching me my voice mattered." Beneath it, just 2 words, "Still rising." Outside, a soft breeze stirred the jasmine. The house stood unchanged, but the story inside had turned irrevocable. Not just a woman reclaiming her life, but a legacy big enough that even her last name was no longer hers alone. The Foundation headquarters had once been a vacant public library, long forgotten, water-stained, its shelves stripped bare years ago. Grace saw potential in its bones. She'd walked through it with Clara last winter, the wind howling through a broken window, the floorboards soft with dust and rot. Now it held light. Fresh paint, open skylights, the distant hum of grant writers at desks, and on the west-facing wall, the one opposite the welcome desk, hung 34 portraits. Black and white, 1 per recipient. Amaya stood at her mural. Carson, holding up a geometry textbook. Marcus, mid-laugh in a graduation gown. Ellie, caught in motion leading a classroom of 3rd graders. Each photo was captioned with a single sentence, handwritten by the subject. "I didn't escape. I rebuilt. Some people inherit wealth. I inherited belief. This trust didn't save me. It trusted me until I saved myself." Grace stood back, fingers laced in front of her, watching the final frame go up. Her own. Bottom right corner. Smaller than the rest, just a candid photo Clara had taken years ago. Grace standing beside a chalkboard, sleeves rolled mid-sentence, eyes lit by some thought she hadn't finished. No caption, only the label. Founder, retired but not done. "Intentional?" asked the gallery assistant. Grace didn't look away. "Very." The ceremony began at 6. Not a gala, not even a ribbon cutting. Just folding chairs, sparkling cider, and paper programs printed on recycled cardstock. Clara had arranged it all. "I kept it simple," she'd said, wearing a pantsuit she borrowed from her daughter. But don't worry. The speeches will be good. I stacked the deck. Grace had rolled her eyes. But now, as she sat near the back, her hands resting on the same quilt she'd folded over her lap, she felt the stillness settle. Not nerves. A readiness. At the podium, a young woman adjusted the mic. Long red braids, navy slacks, voice calm as flint. "Most of you knew me as someone else in high school," she began. "Back then, I was Kylie Evans's friend. We weren't close, but we shared notes and gym clothes and gossip. I sat at the table where she joked that her grandmother was a spare tire." A flicker moved through the room. The girl continued, voice unwavering. "Back then I laughed. We all did. But later, after Kylie ghosted me for calling it cruel, I started thinking about what it meant and who actually kept us from crashing." She turned toward the wall of portraits. "Mrs. Milburn saved more futures than we can count. She was the tire. She was the engine. Hell, she was the road." The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. Grace didn't cry. She just watched. Guest after guest passed the wall, hands behind backs, heads tilted, voices hushed like they were in a gallery that deserved reverence. Rachel wasn't there. Neither was Kylie. But 3 of Kylie's former classmates lingered by Grace's photo, not laughing, not mocking, just reading. Clara sidled up beside her near the end, paper plate in one hand, cup in the other. "She thought you'd leave quietly," she said, eyes scanning the crowd. Grace didn't look at her. "Did she?" Clara smirked. "You left loudly, just not in her language." Grace let the words settle, then smiled. Outside, dusk was swallowing the sky, casting soft golden light through the tall windows. It made the frames glow, like stained glass, but real. Grace stood, smoothing the quilt with one hand, her voice almost a whisper. "Let's turn the lights on. People should see them, not just remember them." Clara nodded, disappearing toward the switchboard. The overheads hummed to life, bathing the wall in soft clarity. And the Milburn name, once boxed into bloodlines and bank accounts, now lived on in 34 illuminated lives. In the corner, the smallest frame caught the light last, but it stayed lit the longest. The ballroom at the National Educator Impact Symposium was elegant in a way Grace had never needed. Ceiling draped in soft lighting, rows of round tables with names in metallic calligraphy, cameras stationed on tall tripods at every angle. Grace Milburn's name was the final one on the program, not headliner, not grand finale, just anchor. Clara sat beside her near the back, clutching a copy of the night's agenda like it might change mid-ceremony. She whispered once, "You good?" Grace nodded. Her breath was calm, her spine straight. The MC called her name. "Please welcome Ms. Grace Milburn, founder, educator, builder of futures." The applause started polite. Then it grew, and then it stood. People rose not with urgency but recognition. Dozens, then more, rising as if pulled up by the weight of something real. Clara stood too, tears welling as she muttered, "About damn time." Grace stepped up to the podium. The mic was angled low. She didn't adjust it. She didn't need to be louder, just clear. "I used to think respect came with age, or with the title parent, or with blood. But I was wrong. Respect isn't owed by birth, it's earned by memory, and some of the people who remember me best never shared my last name." She didn't say Kylie, or Rachel. She didn't have to. She paused, just long enough to let the silence land. Then, "If I've taught you anything, let it be this. You don't need to wait for permission to build the life someone else refused to believe you deserved. You are not what they forgot. You are what you became." No thunderous applause, just stillness. And then a slow, growing wave of hands clapping not for performance, but permanence. Grace stepped down. As she returned to her table, a junior educator from Minneapolis brushed her shoulder. "My mother was a teacher. She'd have loved this." Grace smiled. "Tell her thank you. She passed last year." Grace squeezed her hand. "Then tell her anyway." Backstage, someone handed her a printout. Impact total: $1,012,643, raised 489 students, served 7 expansion cities. Clara whooped when she saw the number, then immediately tried to smother the sound with her napkin. God, they're going to put you on a postage stamp. They won't, Grace said, but they'll put my students on a stage. Outside the venue, the air had turned crisp. A shuttle waited to return them to the hotel, but Grace waved it off. I want to walk. They made their way through the city streets slowly, the noise of the conference fading behind them. At the corner of 8th and Calhoun, a mural stretched across the brick wall of a coffeehouse. Tall, wide, beautiful. A student project sponsored by the Trust. At the center, a figure rendered in warm tones, broad-shouldered, smiling, holding a tattered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Grace stopped. Robert. Painted with care, as if someone had known him, or listened when she talked. Beneath the portrait, in block letters, he believed in second chances. So she gave them away like light. Clara reached for her hand. You gave everything to the right people. Grace didn't speak. She just stood there, watching the color breathe in moonlight. That night, the livestream replayed on dozens of devices across the country, including one apartment in San Jose where Kylie sat cross-legged on a couch, her laptop perched in her lap. She watched the standing ovation, the speech, the numbers. Her mother stood behind her, arms folded. She didn't mention us, Rachel said, not hiding the bitterness. Kylie didn't answer, but her screen was still open when the final slide showed Grace's quote. The feed faded to black. Back in the hotel, Grace folded her jacket over a chair, kicked off her shoes, and pulled out the journal she still traveled with. She opened to the final page, wrote only one sentence, then underlined it twice. I wasn't the spare. I was the engine. They just never looked under the hood.